I just came back from South America where I spent almost a week. We did a JWRP conference, a leadership conference down there in Buenos Aires, where it's just remarkable. It's a whole other world. I'd never been to South America. And I had a tremendous time, and I got this horrible bug on the plane on the way home. So if my voice sounds a bit funky, please forgive me, okay? And also, I just wanted all of us to have on our minds today as we're learning this important stuff for getting ready for Rosh Hashanah, all of our sisters in Florida who obviously couldn't be on the call tonight, and there were 2 Florida cities that were meant to be on our call tonight, but they don't have power. They don't have power, and they don't have water, and they're really struggling. And I know it's moving into Atlanta now and other cities, so I think it would be great if we could keep in mind, all of them, that this storm should be merciful on their cities and that they should be able to rebuild quickly. I was looking the other day at a satellite image of the hurricane, the multiple hurricanes, and it occurred to me that, you know, it's like we now have the capacity to look down on ourselves from above. And it's an interesting thing because in some ways it's a metaphor for the time of year that we're going into. So before we begin, I just wanted to say that the first couple of months after you return from a trip go from a tremendous high and a sense of frustration and missing the experience. And many people often have a big crash about a month and a half or 2 months later where they can't believe that they ever had that experience. And one of the reasons that we want to do this continued learning and to see one another, even if it's only virtually, is to try and remember and shore up the sensations that we felt when we were on the trip. It's an interesting thing. There is in one of our, in our Midrash, a list of 48 ways that a person can acquire greatness in their life, as a dancer, as an artist, as a lawyer, as a doctor, as a mother, in any way. And there's a list of 48 steps that will help you maximize your potential. And one of those steps is called awe. Awe, which is that sensation that you feel sometimes when, you know, your baby is born, or you look at an incredible sunset, or you're standing on a beach and you feel small and huge at the same time. That feeling of being part of something huge and also being so tiny, it kind of takes your breath away. So we have to learn how to harness those feelings. We have to learn how to be able to go back to those feelings when we need them. And all of you will have 1 or 2 times during our trip where your breath had a quick intake, whether you were looking at the cocktail for the first time, or maybe it was just looking around the dance floor and seeing 400 women dancing like lunatics. Whatever it was that struck you, you can train yourself to go back into that space, and it's extraordinarily energizing. So I'm sure by now you all got your questionnaires and your follow-up forms and all of those things. It's really important to me that you know that you can reach out to me anytime, either on Facebook or on my email, which is adrienne@jwrp.org. I always answer, always. And I would be honored and delighted to hear from you and see you. Of course, you can send me those questions for the Ask Me Anythings. And I'm hoping that you're doing some of those Year of Growth sessions, because I've been doing some webinars to go around them to help people learn how to teach it themselves. So tonight, because we are going into the most important time of the year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I want to talk about a subject that I think needs to be on all of our minds for some obvious reasons. And that subject is the art of forgiveness. Now, this is powerful and important, not only because doctors have proven that holding a grudge, medical research has borne out that rage and anger can have terrible physiological effects on your body, and that judging favorably and forgiveness can give you a flow of endorphins that improve your health, not just for those reasons, which are pretty good ones, but for a spiritual reason that I want to float out to you right now. It's a heavy thought, but this is what we Jews believe. And that idea is that as we forgive others, so we will also be forgiven by God. Now that's a heavy statement. What does that mean? It means that we move through life in something called measure for measure, mida keneged mida, which means that what we put out into the world is the way we are looked at. Now, this is different than that book, The Secret, that so many of us have read, because we're not asking the universe to send us good luck. We are talking to the sustainer of the universe. We don't see the universe as random sort of particles that you can, create waves of energy for yourself. We see the universe as Jews, philosophically, as being run by God. And you should know that God's judgment on you is entirely subjective. What does that mean? It means that you are not judged against your sister or your brother or your parents or your neighbor. You are judged entirely against yourself, which means that it's vitally important that you make yourself totally, emotionally, and intellectually honest with yourself this time of year. We learn this because in the Garden of Eden, we know that Adam and Chava ate from that tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they noticed they were naked. Remember, it starts by saying, and they were naked and they weren't ashamed, and then they internalized this negativity, and suddenly they went, oh my gosh, don't look at me. And they went and hid in the bushes. Now, at one point, God asks Adam and Eve a question, a simple question, a one-word question, perhaps the shortest and one of the only questions that God asks. And that question is, Ayeka, where are you? So it's an interesting question because certainly God knows where we are. You know how when you play hide and go seek with a toddler, like a 2 or a 3-year-old, they haven't quite figured out yet that just because they can't see you doesn't mean that you can't see them. So often they'll do things like hide under a chair with their head and their legs hanging out, and they'll go, Mommy, you can't see me, you can't find me. Or they'll even do this, they'll cover their eyes and they'll say, find me. That cognitive development stage does not happen until a little later. And in many ways, Adam and Eve and all of us, the progeny of them, are like spiritual toddlers. We figure that if nobody can see, or we can't see, that it doesn't exist. Now, one of the things I like to think about as metaphoric or scientific for this is the idea of a crystal. If you're standing in the daylight in your home, you don't see anything but the pure white light that comes in from the street. But if you hold up a dream catcher or a crystal, or you have some fancy diamond, that light is going to refract through that crystal. It's called refraction, and it's going to split up into the 7 colors of the spectrum. Roijabuf is how they teach them in school. So does that mean that the colors weren't there just because we couldn't see them? Of course not. It means we require a certain set of circumstances to see what's always there. At this time of year, our people are asking ourselves, Ayeka, where am I? Where am I at? What am I doing? Have I held on to the inspiration to try and become a better person, to use Jewish values to inform my life? Or do I find myself already back to the old? And that's normal and natural. But this time of year is a unique opportunity because we believe that God is very close right now and that you get the kind of spiritual help you need to become as great as you wish to be. So the first thing we have to do, and Socrates says this, is the beginning of wisdom, is the definition of terms. So let's define the term forgiveness. Here's where people get confused. Most people confuse forgiveness with clarity. What does that mean? Well, many times when we understand what motivated a person to hurt us, to cause us pain, to do us wrong. When we understand, oh, God forbid they had a brain tumor, or God forbid they just got served with divorce papers, or God forbid something else terrible happened to them, we forgive because we understand. Or, even more complicated, is that the person treats us with the respect and honor that we feel we deserve, and we feel exculpated by them. But forgiveness is not for that which is understandable or cleared up. Forgiveness is a gift you give for things that were inexcusable. And that's the difference. Why? Well, because we can. Simon Wiesenthal, one of the greatest Nazi hunters, who I talked about a bit on the trip, went through an experience as a young boy in the Warsaw Ghetto. And after, when he survived the camps, he wrote a story about it that I highly recommend you Google after this and read. It's called The Sunflower. So the story went sort of as follows. He was lying on the pavement in the ghetto, sickly and skinny and starving, when a Nazi officer, not 20 feet away from him, was taking his last breaths on the ground. Beside him, kneeling, was one of his friends. Now, the Nazi officer was raised a Christian. He had a sense of morality. He was terrified to go to his death, knowing that he had done unbelievably cruel things. And so he asked his friend, bring over the Jew and get him to forgive me for what I've done. Apparently what he had done was he had watched a father and a mother and a baby standing in the window on the 5th floor of a burning building with the sash behind them on fire, and the father covering up the eyes of the baby and the mother and jumping to their death. And on their way down, this Nazi officer lifted up his pistol and used them as target practice. Heinous. He begged him to forgive him on behalf of his people. But Simon Wiesenthal sat there and said nothing, not a word, until the man expired. Afterwards, he wrote this story and he turned it into a symposium where he brought many, many international religions and posed this as a question to them. Had you been in my shoes, what would you have done? The Christians almost uniformly said you should have forgiven him. The Jews almost uniformly said you should have let him die like you did. And the other religions, they were sort of split around the middle. But there was one thing that Simon Wiesenthal didn't say that he could have said, the thing that would have been right to say. And that was that he wasn't able to. Because in Judaism, we have so much power that God himself recused himself from the ability to forgive you for what you did to someone else, or to forgive someone else for what they did to you. Yom Kippur comes for forgiveness between the issues between man and God. But God made it impossible for himself to offer that. Jewish law says that if someone has hurt you or you have caused someone else pain, you must clean up your own mess. You must ask for forgiveness. We are enjoined not to be difficult to appease. We are enjoined to be accepting of other people's apologies, to be soft-hearted that way. That's supposed to be the way of the Jew. But most of us, when we think of this, we think of who needs to apologize to us. And we don't have a clue that we can cause pain that we don't even know to others, that we have friends and neighbors and associates who are harboring pain around something because they didn't feel that they could come and clear it. This time of year, God gives us the opportunity to attempt to forgive others in order that he looks upon us favorably. So I hope you have the handout. I want to read you a statement. Holding a grudge, staying angry, is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Holding a grudge and staying angry is like drinking poison but expecting the other person to die. We imagine that our rage and anger somehow hurts or damages the other, but it doesn't. It only really hurts ourselves. Another statement: the hardest apology that you will ever have to accept is the one that you didn't receive. Imagine that. Accepting an apology that you didn't receive. Wow. So there's a Greek word called sugnome. I think I'm pronouncing it right, but basically what it means, translated from the Greek, is forgiveness, but it really means exculpation or absolution. Basically, what the rabbi says is, it's not that I forgive you for what you did, but I understand why you did it. You couldn't really help it, or you were caught up in the circumstances that are beyond your control, or I don't need to take revenge on you because, you've shown me proper deference now. So this is a kind of an appeasement technique, and it's not the same as forgiveness. And Franz de Waal, a famous primatologist who studies great apes and bonobos and gorillas, explained that as early as the beginning of animal time, there has been peace and conflict resolution within the tribes of animals. That someone will give in for the sake of the alpha male or alpha female, that somebody will appease the other, and that is creating peace. But forgiveness is a whole other level. So there are 3 levels of forgiveness that I want to take a look at for a minute. And the first level is like this. Some people forgive anyone who wronged them if the person comes to them and asks for forgiveness. You would think that that's the highest level, wouldn't you? I mean, imagine somebody wronged you, they come to you, they say, Adrienne, I'm really sorry. You go, it's fine, forget it, it's over, it's done. Yeah, I forgive you completely. I would have expected that that was the highest level of all. But no, the second level is some people go out of their way to meet up with the person who caused them pain, to make it easier for that person to ask for forgiveness. Whoa. Now, when I first read this, I thought, that's like way beyond me. Like looking for the person who hurt me and like making nice so that they could say they're sorry because they need to apologize. And then I remembered that I do it with my kids all the time because I want those relationships so badly that if I feel that one of my children needs to apologize to me, that they've done something wrong, something that requires them for their character to ask for forgiveness. When they were smaller, one of them was particularly stiff-necked. He had a really hard time saying he was sorry, like to anyone. I talked about him. I talked about this one. This is the one who I told to write it in the air, right? But as he got older, it never really got any easier. Very proud, very headstrong. But when it came to see how dangerous it was that he wasn't able to apologize for his future wife, please God, she should come soon, for his boss, for his teachers, I would do this thing. If the argument or the bad feelings had gone on for a couple of days and he was stuck in his way, I would make him his favorite dinner, or I'd go out and buy him something. And he would come and he would say, thanks, Mommy. Thanks so much. Oh yeah, and sorry about yesterday. And that was usually the best he could do. But I created a space for my children so that they could ask forgiveness, so that I didn't harp on it. You know, with my own husband, when my husband would apologize, I would often milk that apology for weeks because he was so nice to me when he wanted to make up with me. I would enjoy it. I'd get flowers, he'd buy me chocolate, that kind of stuff. And I would like milk it for a while. Not anymore, I don't do it anymore. But for the first decade, I did. And I think that this level of trying to create an environment where an apology can be given and received, that's the second highest level. The highest level is this. People could go to bed every single night explicitly stating their forgiveness to everyone. And in fact, this is so powerful a character trait, a midah, that we even have a paragraph at the beginning of the bedtime Shema Yisrael prayer that states exactly this. I'm going to read it to you. Master of the universe, I hereby forgive anyone who has angered or vexed me, that sinned against me, either physically or financially, against my honor or against anything that's mine, whether accidentally or on purpose, intentionally, inadvertently, or deliberately, by speech or by deed, in this incarnation or any other incarnation. Yeah, we believe in reincarnation. I forgive any Israelite. May no man be punished on my account. May it be your will, Lord my God and God of my fathers, that I don't sin anymore, that I don't repeat my mistakes, that I don't anger you or do what's wrong in your eyes, and that the things I have committed against you, that you erase them with your abounding mercy, as I am doing for others. And that prayer, if the only thing you take on this year and in this month, if you open up a Siddur, an Art Scroll Siddur, or just Google the bedtime Shema online, and you read that paragraph before you go to bed, even if you're faking it, and heaven knows you got to fake it till you make it, it starts to create a new neural pathway that turns you into a person that stops looking at others and looks almost exclusively at yourself. Because while people do wrong us and trouble does occur, we got enough of our own stuff to work on, to not have to worry about others. Now, the very first mention of forgiveness, sociologists also concur, happened in our Torah. Even though the bonobos and the great apes could appease each other, the first mention of forgiveness happens with Joseph and his brothers. So Joseph, if you remember from the Technicolor Dreamcoat, was the favorite son of his father, Yaakov. He was the child of the beloved wife. He had dreams, mystical dreams, where he saw himself as somehow lording it over and ruling over his brothers. He had premonitions, and he would share them with his brothers, and they couldn't stand him. They wanted to get rid of him. And so one day, in a fit of pique, they took him out into the desert. They threw him in a pit. They dipped his cloak, his coat of many colors, in animal blood, and they left him there to be kidnapped and sold as a slave. And they went back to their father and said, look, father, here's our brother's coat. He was killed by an animal. Imagine. Imagine. Yes, they didn't murder him themselves, but imagine doing that. But you can actually, because sibling rivalry is rife all the way through Genesis. You see it one after another after another. Forgiveness between siblings is the oldest story in the book. Remember the very first story of Cain and Abel, that Cain ends up killing his brother. That's what we're capable of. That's the kind of rivalry we as humans are capable of if we don't self-correct. So, 20 years later, there's a famine in the land. And Yaakov sends his sons to go to Egypt, where unbeknownst to them, their brother, who was sold as a slave and ended up in a prison and became a dream interpreter until he was released, and then went to the Pharaoh and became the viceroy of the land and was now second in command to the largest empire and the only powerful empire at the time, was their brother. So when the brothers came to try and get food to bring back to their home because of the famine, Joseph recognized them right away, immediately. And he set up an elaborate plot to see if the brothers were still the mean-spirited, jealous, disloyal men that they were. And they passed every test. And Joseph could see that they had learned from their mistakes. And he says very famously this statement: I am your brother Joseph, who you sold into Egypt. Now, don't be distressed. Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God just sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been famine in the land. And for the next 5 years, there'll be no plowing and there'll be no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives with a great deliverances. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. Can you imagine the level of perspective? Can you imagine being able to be like that satellite that can look over the ocean and see the direction of that tornado, to see from above the overall big picture? How was he able to do that? How was he able to offer forgiveness to his brothers who did the worst thing to him? And how could this help you? When we understand, when we know in our hearts that nothing in this world happens that God doesn't know about, when we understand that the things that are excruciatingly painful are sometimes for the good, and when things that are incredibly pleasurable can be for the bad, when we understand that we can never understand everything there is to understand, then we understand. Joseph chose God consciousness. What is God consciousness? It's the idea or the understanding that there is a greater force at work. And that when his brothers came and needed him, he saw that even though he went through hell to get there, if he had not been exactly where he was at that time, he would not have been able to help his father. Now, most of us will never get to that level, like ever. And I'll tell you something else interesting. Sometimes we cling to anger or that kind of feeling, not because we should, but because it gives us a sense of righteous superiority. It draws a clean line. I'm good, she's bad. I'm right, you're wrong. And that feels good, because a lot of us don't get a lot of that. We don't get a lot of acknowledgement for who we are and what we do. So if somebody messes up, staying angry becomes a way of holding the moral upper hand. And any of you who have ever been punished by a parent who made you pay long after the argument was over, who used money to manipulate you, any one of you who have had a spouse who uses anger as a form of manipulation knows there is nothing more destructive than using anger and grudge holding in order to have leverage over another person. But it's not just dangerous for them, because if that's who you are, that's how you will be judged. So the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, is that so? Said that there were 3 levels of forgiveness that really and truly, if you don't get to even the first level, you're considered as though you're cruel. The Talmud says you're a cruel person if you don't even get to the first level. And it goes like this. The first level of forgiveness is being able to not wish ill on the person. You may not be ready to speak to them. You might still be infuriated and hurt, angry, distressed. You might still be wounded. But you can get yourself to a place at the very least where you don't wish them ill. Now, most people say, well, I never wish anybody ill. But we do. We do. I was telling the group a couple of days ago that I had a boyfriend when I was a teenager, and he broke up with me and he went out with my best friend. And I used to have this reoccurring fantasy at night that his car would drive off a cliff, and the last thing on his mind and the last thing that he said as he screamed, ah, Adrienne, I still love you, because, I couldn't bear it that he could be happy without me. Such was the size of my ego. Better he be dead than with somebody else. And I was so ashamed of this fantasy because it was playing half the day long. So I went to see a psychiatrist, and you know what he said? He said, young lady, if I had $1 for every jilted female who had that fantasy, I would never have to work again, which is a funny thing. Now, he wasn't telling me that it was okay. He was saying it was normal. So obviously, if it's normal, but it's not preferable, the Torah tells us that you have to get to a place at the very least where you don't wish them ill, where your ex-husband, who perhaps is dating all the time, because let's face it, if a man has a pulse and he's alive, he gets a date, whereas a woman can be fabulous and she's sitting around, and you secretly wish that the new girlfriend dumps him, that he knows how it feels, all of that stuff, it's normal. But Judaism doesn't like normal. The ideal state of a Jewish person is to elevate yourself beyond the normal, to make yourself great, to realize, don't hate yourself, don't feel ashamed for those feelings, they're normal, but to work on elevating them. So the very first one is often, I don't know if you've seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof, but there's a scene where they go to the tavern and they go see the Rebbe, and they say to the Rebbe, there's a blessing for everything in Judaism. Tell me, is there a blessing for the evil czar? And the Rebbe says, of course there is. May God bless and keep the czar far away from us. And that's level 1. What's level 2? Level 2 is that the heat and the rage starts to dissipate a bit. You may not be able to relate to the person quite the way you used to. You may not be ready to have a relationship with them, but you don't have to run and hide behind a door when you see them walk into a party, or you don't have to cross the street or like run out of a store if you see they're in there. You're able to just say hello politely. You don't want to talk to them. You're not interested in reconciliation. There's still some heat, a little bit of anger, but not so much that you can't be civil and even kind if necessary. That's level 2. But the highest level, they say, is reconciliation, full forgiveness, and the renewal of the relationship. Now, I want to say right now that this is not always possible. Sometimes sufficient damage can be done that a relationship is not repairable, ever. That a person who is toxic and dangerous for you, that you would require boundaries and distance to keep yourself sane and healthy. But in every relationship, whether it's a marriage or it's raising children through their teens and 20s, and trust me, I'm living this now with kids in their 20s, or your own parents. Relationships are a series of severing of a tie, reknotting it, severing it again, reknotting it. As you go through the life of your relationships, at the end, you will notice that they are a rope filled with knots. But notice something. When you have a string of pearls, those pearls are knotted between each one, because that strengthens the necklace. The knots are not flaws. They are the very thing that strengthens the beautiful jewelry. Now, it can't always happen, and sometimes it certainly shouldn't happen. But I have known women who have repaired relationships that you would have thought were impossible. And I managed to undo some tremendous damage that I did with one of my children through consistent apologies, changing my behavior, acting the way he needed me to act. It is doable. Almost everything is salvageable, at least till level 1. So let's take a look at this again for a minute. It says in Proverbs that where your enemy falls, you're not supposed to rejoice. But then people always say to me, oh yeah, but when Hitler dies, can't we rejoice? When Saddam Hussein dies, can't we rejoice? But, that's kind of the Hitler meter with Jewish people. Like, everything comes back to Hitler. So your ex-husband is not Hitler or Saddam Hussein, and true evil does exist in the world, but it is very rarely someone in your world. It really very rarely is. There was a song that I used to love by the Eagles, and it was called Forgiveness. And the line that used to kill me was, he goes, forgiveness, forgiveness, even when, even if you don't love me anymore. Wow, what a high level. To have your heart shattered, to have somebody say they don't love you anymore, and you forgive them. Why? How? The only way to move through life without being a basket case is to look at the world not as what happens to you, but who you are in the face of what happens to you. That means your self-definition does not come by who hurt you or who did you wrong, but by how you behave in those difficult moments, how you get up to the next rung of spiritual success, the self-discipline, the grace, the energy that you spend working on your character. Joseph understood what a dog that's beaten by his master doesn't understand. If a dog is, God forbid, beaten by its master, the dog will cower away from the stick that the master uses to beat him, not fully understanding that that stick has no power without the master holding it. A person who lives with God consciousness sees that there is something behind the stick, and even when it doesn't feel right, is able to say to themselves, not why me, but what now? That's the rub. Not why me. Because as I said earlier, when you understand that you can never understand everything there is to understand, that's when you understand. But when we say, what now? What can I do with this tragedy? How can I take this pain and turn it into something of worth? How can I fill the broken cracks in the pot with gold? That is when you reach your potential. It's not easy. It hurts terribly a lot of the time. But each and every one of us is capable of getting further than we are. And at this time of year, when God is judging us, we should make a list of those that we need to apologize to. And you should also know that there's an idea that if you apologize to someone sincerely and from your heart once, and they say no, they won't accept it, and you go back to them a second time, and you have a plan of action how your thing that you did is never going to happen again, and you bring a witness with you, and they still say no, and you do it a third time, and they still say no, that sin transfers off you and onto them. We are not meant to hold grudges. We cannot be forgiven for that which we did to others or that which others did to us by God. Only man has the capacity to do that. So I want to draw this to the close by saying that I spoke to 1,600 women this summer, and surely I offended someone, rubbed someone the wrong way, walked by someone without realizing it and made them feel ignored. And if any one of you were that person, I humbly ask you to reach out to me and send me a private message so that I can ask for forgiveness and rectify any pain. I mean it. And as for your family, there's nothing more powerful than a mother's apology to her children. When children see that their mother can apologize, the children know that they can too. A blessing for all of us as we go into this holiest time of the year is that we are all judged to the good, that we are all inscribed in the book of life and good health and meaning, and that we do our best to live up to our potential in creating a world that's befitting of all of us. So I'm going to stop for now. If there are any questions, you can type it in the chat and ask me. I would really love to hear from you. If anything didn't ring true, if anything troubled you, if anything felt questionable. I noticed that Susan is looking for the handout and post a link to it. I would imagine that Erin can take care of that. We do have it. I think that I will take care of that tomorrow. Maybe what you could do, Susan, is to send me or Erin an email asking for it, and I'll have it forwarded to you. My email again, adrienne.g@jwrp.org. Are you guys okay? I wish I could hear you or see you. Are you drinking wine? Thank you. Ladies, have an incredible day, a great night if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And I would love to do this again. Hello, Lori. Hi. Is everything safe in Charlotte? Are you getting wind of any sort? America is just like it's a wreck. Horrible. Wind and rain, but they're okay. So many of our sisters in Orlando, in Tampa, in Boca, and in Miami, so really keep them in your thoughts and prayers tonight, okay? So I send all my love to all of you. Please email me privately and allow me to apologize for anything I can do, okay? Okay. I'm going to sign off now, and blessings to all of you.